Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Monday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers are riding a 5-game win streak. Can they make it 6? And just how good is this team anyway? That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everyone for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how or where you get your podcasts. This one's always free, never behind a paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where fans, over 26,000 of them, of the Lakers, are hanging out and talking about this 5-game win streak, Andy, that has gotten the Lakers on the top section of the Western Conference, a very crowded and very competitive Western Conference. Do want to let people know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with a $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com and get started. So, despite this 9-4 record, Andy, and an opportunity on Tuesday against a really bad Jazz team to go 10-4 on their home floor, by the way, the Lakers, the naysayers, they're doing what naysayers do, Andy. You know what that is?
Say nay.
They're saying nay, and they're looking at the Lakers, and they're wondering, they're like, of all the teams in the West, to me, it's not a scientific review, it feels to me like the Lakers are getting kind of less credit for a pretty good start than other teams in the conference. So there is perhaps a little bit of pessimism as to whether or not the good start for the Lakers is actually real.
Well, I think to some degree, this is a byproduct of, if you're talking about at least like the media response, the punditry or whatever, a lot of them did not have the Lakers any better than like a play-in team heading into it. So they're going to be looking for confirmation of their priors for as long as they can. There is often a lot of backlash among media members about feeling forced to talk about the Lakers, even though nobody's actually putting a gun to their head and it's all a grift because they want to talk about the Lakers because they know it's an engagement. They just can't admit that they want to talk about the Lakers, so that they pretend that they don't. And again, it's a very obvious grift to see through if anybody is paying even the slightest bit of attention. I also think, too, in fairness, there is that concern with the Lakers that if you remove LeBron pushing 40 with some injury, or Anthony Davis and the concerns that are always there about him with some injury, that the team becomes suddenly very ordinary, which is true. I just think that is self-evident about basically every team in the league, other than, I guess, Boston, that just has an insane amount.
But there's so many of those guys, right? That,
like just has an insane amount of top heaviness. But I mentioned this heading into the season that with Phoenix, what I thought was really interesting about it is all of the injury concerns that people brought up with the Lakers and their lack of depth behind LeBron and AD. What happens with an injury with them? Like that is fair to question. We've wondered it, so that is a totally fair thing to bring up, but it felt to me like Phoenix was getting more benefit of the doubt that guys could stay healthy than the Lakers, even though they have plenty of injury history themselves. So I think that is the different elements of, I think, psychology and motivation behind maybe a lack of acceptance to the Lakers perhaps being this good.
Yeah, and look, it's now, by the way, it's the Suns who are the only team in the West in that top 10 with a negative point differential. So the Lakers have graduated out of that. They are at a +1. You look at some of these numbers, and I get it. But to your point, Andy, the Nuggets got off to kind of a slow start, which they did last year as well. They kind of got rolling. And then Nikola Jokic has missed 2 games. And you know what they did in those 2 games? They lost both of them. It turns out Dario Saric, who is a perfectly good player.
They don't have Aaron Gordon too, to be fair, as well.
But they haven't had Aaron Gordon. The new part of that over the last couple games is Jokic.
Sure.
And so, you take stars away, and teams generally are going to suffer for it. And I think it's one of these things in where it's not the Lakers don't have vulnerabilities or don't have flaws, because they obviously do. And it's not that they haven't gotten a little bit of good fortune, because obviously they have run into teams. They ran into Memphis without John Morant. They've run into teams missing players. They played Toronto twice without Scotty Barnes. It's not a great team anyway. And you take away, and did quickly play in either of those games? I know he
played in one of them.
Played in one of them. So a decimated Raptors team, a Memphis team missing some of its best players. Yes, all of these things have happened. The flip side of that is, and we can get back into the vulnerabilities, I do think that comes at the expense sometimes of being like, okay, the Lakers have had a little bit of adversity. They played the last couple games with a paper-thin front court, for example, without Rui Hachimura and Cam Reddish and Jaxson Hayes. Whether you think Jaxson Hayes is really good or not, he's still, a tall person. And the only backup big they have right now is Christian Koloko, really, or, Armel Traore. They don't have options up there.
Right, because this is on top of Jared Vanderbilt and Christian Wood having not played this season at all.
Right.
The thing you mentioned too with the injury,
it's just my point is there is a tendency to only look at the things that have been fortunate for the Lakers without looking at the stuff that is, has been a little bit of adversity. And also, by the way, they're winning those games. They're 9-4.
Look, all we hear about in terms of the league, and it is true, is that there are a rash of injuries affecting a lot of teams, which sucks. But that means the Lakers can't be the only team benefited from playing injury-ridden teams. They've only played 13 games. They cannot have hit all of these teams. And I know they've played some teams that had all of their players. So this stuff is adversely and positively affecting or benefiting teams all over the league, depending on how the schedule shakes out on any particular day. The Lakers have not had their full complement of players since the beginning of the season. You mentioned the Memphis game that they won without Ja, without Desmond Bane. The Lakers lost one of those games because they didn't have Anthony Davis and Rui on top of the guys that were already missing. So again, this is part of the season. I think some of the way, whether you're talking about us or other people analyzing these teams, yes, if you only played a completely soft schedule of either bad teams or good teams missing half of their roster, obviously that has to be taken into account. But at the same time, you can take a look at what is there and say, okay, this is how they're playing. How does this actually look? I think if you've watched enough basketball over the years, if you've paid enough attention to your team over the years, you can have a pretty good idea of what the team looks like. How well are they actually playing?
And I think, for the Lakers, the answer to that question is good and flawed, which is where we get to some of this. The answer is it's
what we told everyone the team was when they headed into the season. We're damn geniuses.
You look at the 4 losses. One of them is to a Cleveland team that is, annihilating pretty much everyone. They have the best point differential in the league. And by the way, are yet to lose. They've played 15 games. They are 15-0. So I'm not going to be, too hard on the Lakers for being one of the 15 teams that Cleveland has beaten up on. They lost a reasonably tight game on Phoenix's home floor. This is before the Durant injury. So it's okay, the Suns have lost 3 in a row, but again, KD got hurt. That was not the situation when they played the first time. That's not a bad loss. They lost to Memphis. You mentioned when Rui and AD were both out. And okay, could they have played better in that game? Yeah, they absolutely
could have played harder. That's why JJ Redick got so pissed off.
Yeah, and so that's not a good game, but Memphis is pretty good. And then they lost the Detroit game. The Detroit game is the one where you look at it and you say, guys, that's not good. But don't look now. Detroit's 7-8. They've won 6 of 10, and they're the 7 and 8. It's the 5 seed in the East. They are not a terrible team, and that loss might start looking a little bit better with time.
I don't think the loss is going to look better because the Lakers entered that game. The biggest obstacle they had was not that the Pistons are deceptively solid at the very least. The biggest obstacle they had is they walked into Detroit thinking it would be a cakewalk. That's why the loss to me will never be better in 3 months, because the biggest reason they lost is they expected the Pistons just to be terrible. But if the Lakers had entered that game with honest effort and just lost, it might be more acceptable in a few months.
I'm not sure how into it they were Saturday night against New Orleans. New Orleans was so bad that they were able to make up for it once we'll talk about it after the break. I'm not even sure necessarily started playing way harder as much.
They did play way harder.
They played harder.
I can give you a stat that breaks it down in and of
But I think what they really started to do was pay the bleep attention. And so their execution was much better in the second half than the first. And if they execute, they're going to be able to beat a team like New Orleans. I don't think the way Detroit is, you have to both execute and play hard. And so next, let's kind of go a little bit further into what we like about this and, the things that we feel like can be sustainable. Also, let's talk a little Dalton Connect, all that coming up next.
Locked On Lakers is brought to you by BetterHelp. This month, it's all about gratitude. Obviously, Thanksgiving, November. And, shout out your family, shout out your friends, shout out the coworkers that make life easier for you, your children, all of that. But there's a person that none of us, I think, really thank enough, ourselves. Like, it can be hard to remind ourselves that we are trying to do our best and make sense of a world that only feels crazier, and that is not easy to do. And sometimes you need to just thank yourself, give yourself a break, be thankful for the best version of yourself. And one way to do that can be therapy. I can personally attest to how much therapy helped me and my family during a really difficult period, just helping all of us learn better ways to communicate and make compromises without feeling unsatisfied or unheard, and to, again, learn to find the best version of yourself, to think beyond your own perspective, which can help bring out the best in people around you. So better version of yourself, better version of everybody. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited for your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched up with a licensed therapist, and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Take off. Let the gratitude flow with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
By the way, quick reminder, LockedOnDaily.com. It's where you get the newsletter. You get the show delivered to you every day in your inbox, along with a lot of NBA analysis from around the network. LockedOnDaily.com. Click on Locked On Lakers. So I think, do I think the Lakers are going to finish with a top 4 record in the West? Probably not. If I had to bet, you made me put money down on it right now, do they finish? I would say probably not. They could, but they probably, my guess is, again, probably not. But there's a lot about what is happening that does feel sustainable, starting with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. I see no reason, short of injuries, knock on everything you can find, that Anthony Davis can't play like this for the rest of the season. I see no reason why LeBron is going to have some sort of massive drop-off with, got to account for back-to-backs, got to, and some missed games and stuff like that. But the level of play from those guys, to me, seems sustainable, and it is the single most important factor in whether or not the Lakers can continue to compete at a high level. Do they have 2 of the 10 best players in the NBA, or guys who can play like that on a night-to-night basis? So far, the answer to that question is yeah, they do.
First, I want to pay off what I talked about before, just with the idea of the stat to me that jumps out that showed how the Lakers in the second half, among executing better, whatever, they were just playing harder. They gave a damn more. In the first half, they got out-rebounded by New Orleans 31-17.
Sure.
And even though New Orleans is a very good offensive rebounding team, they're one of the best in the league, they're one of the worst defensive rebounding teams in the league. They had more defensive rebounds than the Lakers had rebounds. Second half, the Lakers out-rebounded the Pelicans 26-19.
Yeah, like, no, I mean, they played better. They played harder. They did.
Dalton Connect said as much after the game that we came out soft. JJ Redick told us basically wake the F up, play harder. Like
Redick's halftime speech was go get the ball. Like get the effing ball is I think how we phrased it.
Right.
My point isn't that they didn't play harder in the second half. It's that the difference between a team like New Orleans, they needed to play. You can execute. If you execute well, you will overwhelm their talent because they don't have enough of it. A team like Detroit, particularly on their home floor, when they're kind of geeked up to play you, there are certain teams that you need to execute. You need to play as hard as you need to match the effort and execute. And if you leave one of those two things out, you are very vulnerable, even against a team that probably shouldn't be as good as you. You're vulnerable to losing. So the Lakers definitely played harder, better, with more focus in the second half. But I think it was more than they just played harder. They also, I think, paid attention, much more attention.
Well, that's true, but to me, it's part and
stop missing shots. I mean, they missed so many in the first half. It was really the difference between their own glass, like the defensive rebounding statistics. The Lakers their offense was so off; they're missing so many shots. It's the limiting the offensive boards for Detroit or for New Orleans in the second half that I think really illustrates what you're talking about. Less so much the New Orleans' defensive rebounding.
I guess. I think all of it was just a matter of focus, whether you're talking about execution, whether you're talking about effort, whether you're talking about just wanting to play this game.
I think focus is a good word for it.
Sure.
But
as far as the sustainability with LeBron and AD, I'm not going to lie. I feel more confident about it with Anthony Davis because this feels like a continuation of what we were seeing from AD last year, just the true number one option version of it. And the truly empowered version of it, in the way that JJ Redick has laid down the edict. This is AD's team. We are running everything through Anthony Davis. He is our focal point, and everybody, including LeBron, has bought into that. With LeBron, what gives me some pause is how Friday versus San Antonio and Saturday versus New Orleans saw that LeBron, fourth straight triple-double, first time ever in his career, he of many, many, many triple-doubles. It's the first time he ever did that, even acknowledging, he said himself that he didn't feel he was completely in the offensive flow. He turned the ball over too many times. That he was still able to do that at that stage of his career is amazing. But I felt like you could feel the effects on New Orleans. And New Orleans, LeBron looked tired. To me, I have concerns about that over the course of the season in the same way that I have had concerns about that with LeBron over the last couple seasons. LeBron can still do amazing things, but unlike, say, 7-10 years ago, LeBron made it look easy, like effortless. There were times where LeBron was doing astonishing things where it felt like he was barely working a sweat. Now you feel that work. Like with LeBron, you feel the sweat, you feel the effort, which is appropriate. He's almost 40. But that's what doesn't make me feel fully confident about it over the course of the season. But the good news is I am confident about not just AD, but some other guys on this team being able to either maintain their level of play over the last handful of games or actually make it better.
And that I think is kind of what I think is important to get to next. It's like, if it were just LeBron and AD, you'd have some concerns. And look, I mean, some of the supporting cast isn't working out. Again, Rui's been all over the place, and now he's banged up. D'Angelo Russell, who played a much better second half, even though statistically it wasn't looked more in the second half on Saturday like he did throughout the game on Friday. Like he had a really bad first half, but who didn't? But beyond that, you still have questions about the bench, questions about some of the depth, especially with guys hurt and stuff like that. But the flip side is with Reeves, Austin Reeves seems like he's found a little something different, being used different, whatever. Maybe Max Christie found a little something over the weekend that can make him a playable option again. And then Andy Dalton Connect, who is red hot right now. And the question is Connect just on a hot streak? Or is this actually an indication of raising his level to a place where it can be something the Lakers get for the rest of the season? Is this from Dalton Connect sustainable? That is the question I want to ask you next.
Locked On Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel. You can tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets if you just win a $5 bet, $5. And Abe Lincoln picks something that just is very, very seemingly obvious. And $150 in bonus bets. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So let's say you get a hunch in a game. Like it feels like you are just anticipating everything before it happens. You can confirm those hunches with the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Everything is streamlined right there for you. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you get started with $150 in bonus bets by just winning a $5 bet. Your first one, FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Dalton Connect, Andy, is back to shooting. He's about 48% from the field and a little over 48% and a little over 40% from three. Those numbers just by themselves are really good. If you look at just the last 4 games, though, since he went 0 for 4, 4 games before, since then, he has shot the lights out from three-point range, well above 50%. And the question becomes, is this a blip, sort of like just an unusually hot streak from a guy being given to get a little extra minutes? Or is this kind of the beginning of what you see sometimes with rookies where, first 10 games, 5 games, 10 games, 20 games, whatever it is, are difficult. You're making adjustments, but the skill set that he was hired for, so to speak, shooting, JJ Redick called him a 1% caliber shooter. Like if it's starting to come through now and we're just seeing the guy that they drafted.
I feel like you're seeing the guy that they drafted. It's the reason why early on in the season, even as Connect was having some struggles, I kept saying I want JJ to play him more, because I felt like if Connect got more minutes, just more consistent time on the floor, and was more consistently involved with what they were doing, this would eventually come through. Because when you watched him in the summer league and in the preseason, you could tell like this is an NBA player. And he's also, the reason that I was pretty confident in it is he's somebody that has consistently gotten better with every new elevated stage that he's played upon. Like he started out as a very non-recruited JUCO player.
Yep.
Then he went to Northern Colorado. Then he went to Tennessee. And at each of these stages, he kept getting better. Like it's one of those things that I think Connect could maybe be, assuming I'm correct about this, and he really does start evolving into this level of player. I think it's something that GMs around the league are going to have to think about, because, Connect slipped this far because 23 years old and he's an old rookie. And there can be this tendency to think of old young players along those lines as more fully formed products. And this is sort of a fully formed version of who they are. But I think you have to weigh the context of, are they improving? Are they continually getting better as it gets harder? Because We had a sample size with Connect. It was getting harder for him, the surroundings.
Yeah.
And he kept getting better as it was getting harder. So again, we'll see how this maintains moving forward, but I'm actually pretty confident that I'm not saying he's going to keep shooting like 50-something% from behind the arc and putting up 20 points a night or something like that.
No, but that's
I don't even know if I'll have the volume
exactly.
for that.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're asking me, do I think this version of Dalton Connect is real? The answer is hell yeah, I think it's real.
I look at this with Connect and I think of it this way. I think teams are going to start figuring out, like, he efforts on defense. You know, it's when you start breaking down the metrics and like the numbers that I've seen, at least, and even as complicated as defensive metrics can be, they're not good. With Connect, and that's to be expected. It was the expectation coming out of college. It's always difficult.
They're not good with just about everyone, right? In all honesty,
he's got company.
Yeah,
but the thing about it is he is a shooter, and when somebody like Reddick, who understands a thing or two about shooting, puts that on you and like says like, this is who this guy is. It can take, NBA defenses move quicker. They are faster. The gap that you had to get a shot off in the NBA is smaller than it is in the one in college. And even you see, he's still getting clean looks and all that. It takes a second. This is really hard. Like you say, he's not going to be shooting over 50% from three for the rest of the year. But the Lakers, the one thing I think that you can say about the guy is he unquestionably is a shooter, and he can shoot off catch and shoot. He can shoot coming off screens. He can shoot as part of a screen. Like, there's no situation in which he can't shoot. And I think this part of his game is, I think Dalton Connect is going to shoot 40-ish% from 3-point range at pretty good volume for whatever per minute for the rest of the year. I do not think that part of it is going to go away. That changes. We'll get maybe, particularly if he starts getting 25, 30 minutes a night, which we can maybe get into over the course of the week. If he's doing that, that changes fundamentally what the Lakers are, because they have never, I'm trying to think, you and I have covered this team for 20 years, give or take. How many of these guys have we seen? Dudes who are just shooters. Like, I'm not saying he's Clay. I'm not saying he's good as Steph. I'm not saying he's prime Reddick. But you understand, like, that's sort of the mold of this. Is like, an 8 or 9 Buddy Hield, that kind of player.
This is what makes it, I think, a very, if not singular, a more specific type of player that we're thinking about, because you are correct. Like, Dalton Connect is clearly a shooter, and he's a varied shooter. But what I think makes him difficult, like really more difficult to guard than just the fact that he can shoot, is he's also capable of putting the ball on the floor and going to the rim with force, which affects how you guard him, because as much as you don't want to detach from him, you can't get too close because he's capable of getting by you. He's capable of getting to the rim. Like, I'll tell you who comes to mind to me, just in terms, as far as guys the Lakers have had that have both that type of shooting skill and the ability to actually do something closer to the rim. The first guy that came to mind to me is Nick Young. Like, Nick Young was capable of scoring both around the rim. He was very athletic and could also, Nick Young could fill it up like as a shooter. Like, Nick Young was a very, very good shooter. It may not be a perfect comp, but this is off the top of my head. And again, I'm thinking about this in terms of guys who are capable of being dangerous because they weren't limited to just shooting.
Okay. It's not, I agree with you. He's not, he is a more varied scorer than JJ Redick in his prime, to use an example. In that sense, you go back to, more like prime Clay when he was able to put the ball on the floor in game. I'm not saying he's Clay.
Well, the guy, I'll tell you who he reminds me of, never a Laker, but just in terms of that ability to shoot, but also the athleticism and get to the rim. And I hate doing, white on white crime comparisons, but he reminds me of Mike Miller in that way. Like,
okay, and that's close to the. So what I'm talking about here is just having a guy who you know is a high volume, high success 3-point shooter, and the fact that the Connect can do more is even better. But I'm just talking about this particular skill set changes what the Lakers, because they have, you know, it's a different era. Vlad is a guy who came to the team with a reputation as a 3-point gunner that shoots at high volume at the time. Not as good, but like different era. Nobody weren't shooting. But I'm trying to think of guys, because there's a difference between a player who can shoot and a shooter, and having one of these guys.
I mean, KCP.
No, that's not KCP.
I mean, KCP worked a lot off screen, stuff like that.
He did, but that wasn't like you didn't have to respect KCP's 3-point game. He wouldn't change a scouting report and a defense in the way the Connect will, in theory, if he keeps this up, because it's just not the same kind of weapon. Certain players fit into this category of. Buddy Hield is like that. Like, when he's been really good. And, it is a different element to the Lakers offense than theoretically. And again, he's got to keep it up for more than 4 games. But if this turns into something a little more sustainable, and if his minutes go up, it has the potential to really alter what the Lakers look like on both sides of the floor, because if they score more efficiently, if they're a more balanced team offensively, they're doing all that stuff, they're going to be more effective defensively. And so I think the next 10 games and what Redick does with Connect, especially when guys, Rui's healthy, Cam Reddish is healthy, players are available, I think it's going to be really telling, because I think LeBron and AD, you can count on what they are. I think Austin Reeves, you can count on what they are. D'Lo is going to be a bench version of this, and it's going to be a little inconsistent, but it's also, in theory, slightly less important sometimes. One of the biggest unknowns of what they are at this point is Dalton Connect to be somebody who elevates closer to what we've seen in the last couple games versus what we got in the first 6 or 7. That to me is the one of the biggest remaining, like, changes the trajectory of the team kind of questions.
Before we go, I did a quick shout out to Christian Koloko, and I think it's actually really important, and it might fly under the radar with a lot of other stuff going on with this team. But the fact that they have been able to put him on the floor, given his lack of NBA experience, period, but the fact that he'd been away from the game for 18 months. And, LeBron talked about after the New Orleans game, he has not practiced with this team since he was formally brought up with the idea that you're going to play. I thought he actually played pretty well against New Orleans. I recognize it's largely second, third string players, the quality of competition dropped, but they have not really missed Jaxson Hayes since Koloko has been taking his place.
I think that's fair.
That no matter what you think of Hayes, Hayes has an important role on this team. I think on balance, Hayes has actually been pretty good this year, but the fact that Koloko has actually been able to be put on the floor, he's -1 over 5 games. You can absolutely live with that. That is, especially considering the context, doing good work. I actually think he's been getting better as his time with the Lakers has been going along. And there's something there, I think, in terms of his overall potential. But in the meantime, just that they can put him on the floor for 10 to 12 minutes and it's not a disaster, I think that is a really underrated thing that has gone well over these 5 games. I just wanted to give him a little bit of props because I think it's actually been pretty important.
I would agree. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can go hang out with over 26,000 subscribers to the channel. We will be back for Tuesday's show. Get you ready for the game against the Jazz, and keep maybe exploring this whole Dalton Connect in minutes and starting, and perhaps because we're starting to get some comments and questions about that. So we'll get into it this week. See everyone tomorrow.